Close your eyes. Imagine a mind so vivid, so restless, that even dreams refuse to stay in the shadows. Carl Jung lived in that space between waking and sleeping, a space where symbols whispered, shadows lurked, and forgotten gods reappeared in the language of dreams. To most of us, these inner visions flicker and vanish before dawn. But to Jung, they were not illusions. They were truths, powerful, ancient truths, buried in what he called the collective unconscious. But here lies the danger. What happens when you see what other people cannot? What happens when you return from the depths of the mind carrying visions that seem too strange, too threatening, too alive? Jung knew that to look directly into the unconscious was to risk madness, and yet to ignore it was to risk never truly living. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, we will walk quietly through Jung's world. We'll explore the archetypes that shape our dreams, the shadow that follows us in silence, the anima and animus that dance within us, and the endless search for wholeness he called individuation. This is not a lecture. It is a dream, disguised as a story, a lullaby for the restless mind. A slow journey into the philosophies of Carl Jung, told gently enough to carry you into rest, yet deep enough to leave you with questions that will linger in the morning light. So, settle in, breathe deeply, allow your body to grow heavy, while your mind follows me into the inner forest, where Jung believed the soul waits to be found. There is a path that winds through the forest, and tonight, we will walk it together. The trees stand high above us, their branches closing over the trail, as if they wish to keep some secret hidden from the outside world. It is quiet here, but not empty. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow moving at the edge of your vision feels alive, as if the forest itself were waiting for you to listen. Carl Jung once described the mind in just this way, like a deep, dark forest filled with symbols and creatures that seemed both familiar and unknown. To step into it is to step away from the safety of daylight, away from the neat roads and tidy maps of reason, and into a realm where vision itself can be dangerous. Jung was no ordinary thinker. He lived at the edge of two worlds. To many, he was a physician, a man in a white coat who studied the disorders of the mind. To others, he was a prophet of the inner life, someone who dared to take seriously the images and voices that arose from the unconscious. He knew that what we call madness might sometimes be only a person's soul, trying desperately to speak. And so, rather than silence those voices with dismissal, he chose to listen. He chose to walk into the forest. But Jung also knew the peril of this journey. He understood that seeing what others cannot see can be both gift and curse. Imagine standing before your friends or colleagues, speaking of visions, of inner figures, of voices from dreams, and imagine their faces, the polite nods, or the skeptical smiles. To Jung, these visions were real forces, as real as any scientific fact. Yet he risked ridicule, misunderstanding, even exile from the very profession that gave him his authority. To look too far inward was to risk being labeled insane. And yet, he could not stop himself. He once wrote that the modern mind suffers because it has turned too far outward, chasing material progress while abandoning the soul. But turning inward was no simple remedy. It was not a gentle meditation, but a plunge into the underworld. Jung himself nearly broke under the weight of his own visions. After his split from Sigmund Freud, he endured what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. For years, he was tormented by images, symbols, and strange inner dialogues that flooded his waking hours. It was as though the gates of the unconscious had been thrown open, and he was left to navigate the torrent without a guide. He painted, He wrote, he drew mandalas, and spoke to inner figures, preserving these experiences in the massive manuscript later known as the Red Book. But during that time, he feared for his sanity. To see so much, to feel the archetypal powers of the mind so vividly, was overwhelming. He was a doctor who had become his own patient, a healer forced to cure himself. He knew that if he could not find a way through, he might be lost forever. This is the danger of inner vision. It is not always a sanctuary. Sometimes it is a storm, and the person who ventures inward without preparation risks being swept away. Jung compared it to opening the doors of an ancient temple and finding not silence, but a multitude of gods demanding recognition. These gods were not literal deities, but archetypes, powerful forces within the psyche that shape our thoughts, emotions, and dreams. To ignore them was to be ruled by them unconsciously. To face them was to risk being torn apart by their intensity. And yet, despite this danger, Jung insisted that we must walk the forest path. He believed that every human being has within them both light and shadow, reason and mystery, consciousness and depths still unknown. To live only on the surface, to pretend that our inner forest does not exist, is to live half a life. He wrote that the greatest tragedy is not death, but the unlived life, the refusal to confront the soul's own reality. So when we walk here, in this imagined forest, we are doing more than strolling through trees. We are following Jung's invitation to enter the symbolic world within us, to pay attention to the whispers and images that rise when we allow the mind to wander freely. We may not understand everything we see. We may not even remember it all in the morning. But by daring to step onto this path, we acknowledge that there is more to us than meets the eye, more than reason can explain. For Jung, this journey inward was not about indulgence or escape. It was about balance. Modern people, he believed, had become one-sided, too rational, too focused on material progress. By refusing to honor the unconscious, they left themselves vulnerable to its eruptions in the form of neurosis, anxiety, and despair. What we ignore inwardly returns outwardly in distorted forms. And so the forest path was both a danger and a medicine. It could frighten you, yes. It could even unhinge you, but it could also lead to healing if you were willing to walk carefully, with patience and humility, as you lie here now, breathing slowly, feeling your body sink into rest. Think of yourself on this forest path. There is no rush. Each step is quiet. The shadows are not enemies. They are simply the parts of you waiting to be seen. Jung would remind you that you are not walking into madness, but into wholeness. And while others might fear what you see, while they might laugh or dismiss or turn away, remember that to see what others do not is not always a curse. Sometimes it is the beginning of wisdom. And so, in this quiet forest, let us pause. The air is cool. The night is calm. You are safe here, even as the symbols begin to stir. This is only the beginning of Jung's journey, the first steps on a path that leads deeper into the dream. Dreams arrive quietly. They slip into the mind when the body is heavy with sleep, carrying stories that make no immediate sense. A house with endless rooms, a bird that speaks, a loved one who appears and then vanishes. Most people, upon waking, dismiss these fragments as nonsense, random firings of a brain at rest. But Carl Jung did not dismiss them. To him, dreams were not meaningless noise. They were letters written in a secret alphabet, messages sent from the deepest parts of the psyche to the waking self. Jung's fascination with dreams began early in his life. As a boy, He was haunted by recurring images, visions of underground chambers, figures both terrifying and divine. He could not shake the feeling that these dreams carried significance, though he could not yet decipher their language. Later, as a psychiatrist, he discovered that his patients' dreams often revealed truths that they themselves could not admit while awake. A dream of drowning might speak to buried grief. A dream of being chased might reveal guilt or fear. He saw dreams as natural expressions of the unconscious, offering insights into the conflicts and possibilities of the inner life. To Jung, dreams had a purpose. They were not random at all. They were compensatory, balancing out the one-sidedness of waking consciousness. If you were too rational, your dreams might present images of chaos. If you denied your anger, your dreams might confront you with fire or violence. The psyche, he believed, seeks equilibrium, and dreams are one of the ways it restores balance. This idea was revolutionary because it suggested that the unconscious was not merely a storehouse of repressed desires, as Freud believed, but a living system with wisdom of its own. The unconscious was not just a problem to be solved. It was a guide, and dreams were its language. Jung's patients often resisted this idea. They wanted neat answers, diagnoses, quick fixes. But Jung encouraged them to sit with their dreams, to let the strange images work on them slowly, like seeds growing in the dark soil of the mind. He advised drawing the dream, painting it, writing about it. He himself recorded thousands of his own dreams, sketching them, coloring them, turning them into mandalas and mythic stories. To him, each dream was a window into the soul's attempt to speak. Consider, for example, the dream of a child standing in a vast cathedral, staring up at a terrifying figure on the altar. To an outsider, it might seem random, but Jung would ask, what does the cathedral mean to you? What does the figure remind you of? Perhaps the dream reveals the burden of authority, the weight of inherited beliefs pressing on the psyche. Perhaps it shows the need to confront fear, or to redefine one's relationship to the divine. There was no single interpretation for all people. Each dream was a conversation between the dreamer and their unconscious, a message tailored for them alone. Jung also believed that some dreams reached beyond the personal unconscious into the collective. He noticed that dreams often carried symbols that appeared in myths across cultures: snakes, heroes, mothers, journeys into darkness. These archetypal images, he said, belong to all humanity. They are not invented by the individual, but inherited, ancient, woven into the very structure of the psyche. When they surface in a dream, they connect the dreamer to something far larger than themselves, something shared across time and culture. This is why Jung spoke of dreams as gifts. They were not intrusions, not meaningless static. They were attempts at healing, at wholeness, at guiding the dreamer back toward balance and truth. But the gift required patience. It required humility, for the dream rarely speaks in plain words. It speaks in riddles, in images, in paradoxes. To treat the dream as nonsense is to throw away a letter unopened. To honor it is to engage in a lifelong dialogue with the deepest parts of oneself. In his practice, Jung often told patients that the dream knows what the ego does not. He recounted the story of a woman who dreamed of a scarab beetle. While she told him the dream, a beetle flew into the room, the same rare species she had described. To Jung, this was synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence that revealed the dream's power to bridge inner and outer worlds. The dream was not merely an internal echo, but a living reality intertwined with the world itself. As you rest now, breathing softly, you may recall fragments of your own dreams, perhaps a face, a place, a sensation. Do not hurry to interpret them. Simply let them drift through your mind like clouds across the sky. Jung would say that even the smallest fragment has meaning, and that the unconscious often repeats its messages until they are heard. In this way, sleep itself becomes sacred. Each night, as consciousness fades, you step into the threshold of the unconscious. Each dream is a doorway, each symbol a lantern left for you to find your way. Jung invites you not to fear these dreams, not to dismiss them, but to see them as guides. They may not always flatter you. They may confront you with truths you have avoided, but they are yours, sent from the deepest part of yourself to help you live more fully awake. So tonight, as you drift further into rest, let your dreams come. They are not intruders. They are messages. They are gifts. And if you listen gently, patiently, you may find that the dream world has always been whispering to you, waiting for you to hear. Imagine for a moment that your mind is not a separate island, but part of a vast and hidden ocean. On the surface, you live your daily life. You think your thoughts, remember your past, feel your emotions, and act according to the patterns of your upbringing. This is what most people call the mind, the conscious life we are aware of. Beneath it lies the personal unconscious, filled with forgotten memories and experiences too faint to recall. But Jung believed there was still a deeper level, one that did not belong only to you. He called it the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious, he said, was like a shared reservoir of images, instincts, and patterns that every human being carries simply by virtue of being human. It does not arise from your individual experience. It is not the result of what your parents taught you or what you have seen in your lifetime. It is older, deeper, and inherited. It is the psychic inheritance of the entire human species, an invisible web that connects you not only to your family or your culture, but to all people across all of history. When Jung introduced this idea, many dismissed it as fantasy. To suggest that beneath the personal mind lay a universal sea seemed mystical, even unscientific. But Jung observed its presence in dreams, in myths, in art, and in the unexplainable similarities that appear across cultures. A person in Switzerland dreams of a serpent, while an ancient Egyptian text speaks of the same serpent as the embodiment of chaos. A child in one country dreams of a wise old man, while a distant culture worships the same figure as a sage or shaman. How could such patterns exist unless there was some shared ground, a deep foundation common to all? Jung often described the collective unconscious in terms of archetypes, primordial forms or patterns that shape how human beings experience the world. These are not literal images, but tendencies of the psyche to imagine certain figures, themes, and stories. Think of the mother, the hero, the trickster, the shadow. These appear everywhere, from fairy tales to religious myths to the private dreams of ordinary people. You did not invent them, yet they surface within you as if carried by an ancient memory. This hidden ocean beneath every mind can feel mysterious, even eerie. It suggests that your thoughts are not wholly your own, that your imagination is not a private creation, but a window into something older and greater. When you dream of flying, or falling, or being chased, you are not only processing your daily concerns, you are dipping into a deep well of human imagery that has been present for thousands of years. Jung was fascinated by how the collective unconscious revealed itself in moments of crisis. Patients on the edge of breakdown often reported dreams or visions filled with mythic symbols. A man facing despair might dream of descending into an underworld. A woman suffering loss might dream of water rising and covering the land. These were not random fantasies. They were the unconscious reaching for images that gave shape to the most intense human experiences, drawing not from personal memory, but from universal patterns. He believed this was why myths and religions across the world resembled one another, even when cultures had never met. The flood myth, for example, appears in the Bible, in Mesopotamian epics, in the traditions of faraway lands. It is as if humanity, separated by oceans and mountains, still dreamed in harmony, still carried the same symbolic language within them. To Jung, this was proof that the human psyche is not just an individual phenomenon, but a collective one. We are not isolated beings adrift in the universe. We are expressions of a shared soul, a species-wide inheritance that whispers to us in dreams, in art, in sudden flashes of meaning. But here lies a paradox. The collective unconscious offers guidance, yet it can also overwhelm. To touch it is to risk losing yourself in forces that feel larger than life. Jung himself wrestled with this when he opened himself to visions during his years of inner turmoil. He wrote of encounters with figures that seemed alien and yet profoundly familiar, archetypal beings that belonged not to Carl Jung the man, but to humanity itself. He feared that he might lose his identity, dissolve into these collective forces without a way back. It was only by carefully recording, painting, and reflecting on them that he kept his balance. The collective unconscious is not a thing you can see or measure in the usual sense. It reveals itself indirectly in the recurrence of patterns, in the universality of myths, in the way strangers from different times and places dream the same dream. You cannot walk into a laboratory and pull it out from the brain like a physical organ. But Jung insisted that it was real as gravity, because its effects were undeniable. As you lie here now, drifting into the rhythm of your breath, consider what it means that your dreams, your imagination, your fears, and longings may not be only yours. When you dream of a journey, countless others before you have dreamed the same. When you feel awe before the night sky, countless others have felt that awe too, stretching back into prehistory. You are not alone in your inner life. You are connected to a hidden ocean beneath the mind, one that carries the memories and images of the entire human story. To fall asleep is to slip into that ocean, to float for a time in its depths. Your personal life, your daily worries and routines are like ripples on the surface, but beneath them, the great current of the collective unconscious moves quietly, timelessly, drawing you into the same sea where all souls swim together. If the collective unconscious is the ocean beneath every mind, then archetypes are the great creatures that live in its depths. They rise from the darkness in symbolic form, surfacing in myths, stories, and dreams. They are not invented by culture, nor are they private creations of imagination. They are universal, ancient patterns of thought and feeling, repeating themselves wherever human beings tell stories or wrestle with life's mysteries. Carl Jung often described archetypes as psychological instincts, inborn tendencies to shape experience in certain ways. Just as the body is born with the instinct to breathe, the mind is born with the instinct to imagine certain figures and dramas. A child does not need to be taught the idea of a hero, or of a nurturing mother, or of a threatening darkness. These images come unbidden, because they belong to the architecture of the psyche itself. Think of the archetype of the mother. Every culture has its stories of the great mother figure nurturing, protective, but also sometimes devouring or smothering. The Virgin Mary, Demeter, Isis, Kali, Mother Earth, different names, different faces, but the same underlying pattern. When a child dreams of a kind woman offering food, or of a dark, suffocating presence, They are meeting the mother archetype in its positive or negative form. Or consider the hero. This archetype appears in every epic. The one who leaves home, faces trials, confronts monsters, and returns transformed. Hercules, Odysseus, King Arthur, Luke Skywalker, all iterations of the same fundamental figure. The hero is not just a character, but a psychological process. It is the call to growth, the struggle against chaos, the journey toward integration. The shadow is another archetype, perhaps the most unsettling. It represents everything in ourselves that we deny or repress, the dark mirror of the ego. In myths, it appears as monsters, demons, or villains. In personal dreams, it might take the form of a threatening stranger or an animal that stalks in the night. Jung warned that to ignore the shadow is to risk being ruled by it unconsciously, but to face it, to integrate it, is to gain strength and humility. The wise old man and the great mother, the trickster and the child, the anima and animus, the self that unites opposites, all of these are archetypes, recurring figures that give structure to human experience. They appear in our personal lives, but also in the collective imagination of humanity. Stories from distant times and places echo one another because they are built on the same archetypal foundations. Jung did not believe archetypes were rigid or literal. They shift and change, wearing new masks in different eras. But beneath the mask, the same pattern is at work. A superhero movie today carries the same archetypal drama as an ancient myth told around a fire. A fairy tale whispered to a child at bedtime is a miniature of the same forces that drive epics and scriptures. Why do these figures matter? Because they guide us through life. Archetypes provide a map for the soul, showing us the trials we must face and the growth we can achieve. Without them, our experiences would feel random, chaotic, unshaped. With them, we find meaning, as if our private struggles are part of a greater story. Jung warned, however, that archetypes are powerful and dangerous. To be possessed by an archetype is to lose oneself. A leader who becomes inflated with the hero archetype may see themselves as invincible, destined, beyond morality. A nation seized by the archetype of the shadow may project its own darkness onto enemies, leading to persecution and war. Archetypes must be recognized, integrated, balanced, not worshipped blindly. When you dream, archetypes awaken. You might encounter a guide, a child, a threatening figure, or a journey into unknown lands. These are not random images. They are the psyche's way of telling you where you are in the great story of human life. They remind you that your personal journey echoes the journey of countless others, that your struggles are both unique and universal. As you listen, as you drift further into rest, imagine these archetypes moving gently in the depths of your unconscious. They are not enemies. They are guides, forces of nature within the psyche. They remind you that you are not only an individual, but also a participant in the timeless drama of humanity. Every story ever told is, in some way, your story too. And every dream is another chapter in that unfolding tale. In every quiet room, in every heart that has ever looked into the mirror and turned away, there is a shadow. Jung spoke of this shadow not as something supernatural, not as some ghost lurking in the dark corners of a house, but as a part of ourselves, the part we do not wish to see. The shadow, he said, is composed of everything about us that we repress, deny, or refuse to admit. It is made of anger we push down, desires we judge as unacceptable, fears we cannot face, and traits we condemn in others, but secretly carry within. When you close your eyes at night, when you drift in that soft space between waking and sleep, the shadow sometimes slips forward. It might appear in a dream as a figure who frightens you, a stranger with your face, but eyes you do not recognize, or an animal lurking just beyond reach. These are not mere inventions of the mind. They are messages, signs from the unconscious, telling you that you cannot live wholly by denying a part of yourself. Jung discovered the shadow through careful listening. Patients would come to him, troubled by conflicts that seemed unexplainable. They would describe a life where everything appeared orderly, respectable, controlled, and yet in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in sudden bursts of rage or despair, another self emerged. This other self was rude, selfish, chaotic, even violent. It was everything they believed they were not. Jung realized that to live only in the light of our conscious values is to create a darkness where the rejected parts of us gather. The more we deny them, the stronger they become, until one day, they break through. The shadow is not evil by nature. It is not a demon to be destroyed. It is human, and like every human force, it has two sides. Within it lies danger, yes, but also vitality. The shadow holds not only what is shameful but also what is neglected. Talents and desires that could enrich our lives if only we had the courage to accept them. A person who insists they are always gentle may repress their assertiveness, only to discover that in the shadow lies their ability to stand strong. A person who prides themselves on logic may deny their intuition, only to find that in the shadow rests a wisdom that cannot be reasoned out but only felt. But meeting the shadow is frightening, because it requires humility. It asks you to admit that you are not only what you want to be, not only the image you show the world. It asks you to recognize the lies you tell yourself, to admit that you are capable of cruelty, of selfishness, of envy. It asks you to look into the mirror without turning away. Jung often warned that those who refuse to acknowledge their shadow will project it onto others. They will see in their neighbors, in strangers, in entire groups of people, the very qualities they cannot accept in themselves. This is why individuals, and even societies, sometimes become consumed by hatred, convinced that the evil they fight lies entirely outside, when in truth, it is their own shadow, disowned and unrecognized. Integration of the shadow does not mean indulging it blindly. It does not mean giving free rein to every destructive impulse. Rather, it means becoming aware, holding the shadow in consciousness, and finding a place for it in the whole of your being. Jung said that the process of individuation becoming whole requires that we bring the shadow into the light of awareness. Only then can its energy be transformed from something destructive into something creative. Imagine walking once again through the forest of the mind. The path is dim, and a figure appears at the edge of the trees. At first, you are afraid. The figure seems twisted, strange, unacceptable. But as you approach, you realize that it is you, your forgotten anger, your buried sadness, your unacknowledged strength. To reject it is to live divided, forever haunted by what you flee. To accept it is to become more whole, to walk forward not as half a person, but as one who embraces the full spectrum of human possibility. As you listen now, breathing slowly, perhaps you sense your own shadow moving softly in the background of your mind. It may not reveal itself fully tonight, and that is all right. The shadow is patient. It waits until we are ready. But Jung would remind you that ignoring it does not make it disappear. It only grows stronger in silence. To live peacefully with oneself, to live authentically, is to turn and greet this shadow, not with fear, not with hatred, but with acknowledgement. For in the end, the shadow is simply you, waiting to be seen. Every morning, as you rise from sleep and prepare to step into the day, you put on a mask. Not a physical one, but a psychological mask. Invisible yet essential. Jung called this mask the persona. It is the role we play, the face we show to society, the carefully crafted identity that allows us to move through the world with some measure of order and acceptance. Without the persona, we would be too raw, too unfiltered, exposed to the overwhelming chaos of human interaction. With it, we find a place among others, a way to belong. The persona is shaped by culture, by family, by the expectations of the society into which we are born. A child quickly learns what is rewarded and what is frowned upon. Smile and be polite, and the world responds kindly. Show anger or vulnerability, and perhaps it turns cold. From these lessons, the child begins to form a mask, a role that says, "This is who I am," when others are watching. By adulthood, the mask has hardened. You may know it as your public self, professional, polite, acceptable. Jung did not condemn the persona. He saw it as necessary. Without some form of mask, we would be unable to live together. Imagine a person who blurted out every thought, acted on every impulse, revealed every secret emotion in public. They would be isolated, overwhelmed, misunderstood. The persona is a kind of social contract. It allows us to live among others without constant conflict, to maintain harmony by showing only a selected version of ourselves. But the danger of the persona is forgetting that it is a mask. When the mask becomes fused with the self, when we believe we are nothing more than the role we play, then the soul begins to wither. The doctor who believes he is only a doctor, the teacher who believes she is only a teacher, the parent who believes their worth exists only in sacrifice. These people risk losing touch with the deeper currents of their being. They mistake the surface for the depth, the mask for the face. Jung encountered many patients who lived entirely within their personas. Outwardly, they were successful, respected, admired, but inwardly, they were hollow, haunted by emptiness. They had lived so long as the mask that they no longer knew who they were without it. When the persona cracks, perhaps through crisis, failure, or loss, the true self demands recognition, and the individual may feel they are falling apart. But Jung saw this collapse not as disaster but as opportunity. For when the persona shatters, the soul is free to show itself. In dreams, the persona often appears as clothing, uniforms, or masks. To lose one's clothes in a dream might symbolize the loss of the persona, the terrifying yet liberating exposure of the true self. Jung urged his patients to look beyond the persona, to recognize that it is only one layer of the psyche. Beneath it lies the shadow, the anima and animus, and the deeper self that seeks wholeness. But Jung also understood the paradox. The persona cannot be discarded entirely. We need it to function. The task is not to destroy the mask, but to know it as a mask, to wear it lightly, to recognize that you are more than your role, more than your social face, more than the expectations placed upon you. In this recognition lies freedom. You can play your role in the world while still nurturing the inner life that gives you depth and authenticity. As you rest now, think of your own mask. Think of the face you show to colleagues, to friends, to family. Notice how it shifts, how you wear different versions depending on the stage you stand upon. And then, gently, remember that behind all these masks is you, the quiet witness, the soul that dreams, that suffers, that loves, that longs for wholeness. The persona is a tool, a garment you can wear, but it is not the essence of who you are. Jung would whisper that true peace comes when you can step out of the mask, if only for a moment, and sit with your deeper self. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let the mask fall away. The world is not watching. No role is required. You are free to be simply you, unmasked, unjudged, whole. When Jung looked into the depths of the psyche, he discovered not only shadows and masks, but a mysterious polarity within each human being. He realized that every man carried within him an inner image of the feminine, and every woman carried within her an inner image of the masculine. He called these figures the anima and the animus. They were not simply about gender roles or social expectations. They were archetypal forces, currents that shaped the soul from within. Jung saw the anima as the feminine side of a man's psyche, the image of woman that lives deep within him. She might appear in dreams as a mysterious woman, sometimes nurturing, sometimes destructive, always possessing an uncanny power to fascinate and disturb. The anima, Jung said, mediates between the conscious mind and the unconscious. She is a guide into the depths, a voice that connects reason with feeling, logic with intuition. In her positive form, she brings creativity, empathy, and connection with the soul. In her negative form, she becomes seductive, deceptive, irrational, pulling the man into moods or fantasies that consume him. For women, Jung described the animus, the inner masculine figure that could appear as a wise teacher, a fatherly guide, or at times as a chorus of harsh, judgmental voices. The animus, when undeveloped, can dominate a woman's mind with rigid opinions and dogmatic certainty, cutting her off from her own living feelings. But when integrated, the animus brings strength, clarity, and the courage to act in the world. It is the energy of logos, of order and purpose, balancing the fluidity of emotion with the grounding force of reason. These inner figures are not bound by biology alone. They are psychic realities that reflect the duality present in all human beings. Just as day contains night and the sky holds both sun and moon, so the human psyche carries within it both masculine and feminine principles. Jung saw them not as opposites at war, but as complementary forces that must be reconciled for wholeness to emerge. He illustrated this through myths and stories. In many tales, the hero encounters a mysterious woman who aids or hinders his quest. She may give him a magical gift or lure him into danger. Jung interpreted these figures as projections of the anima, externalized in story but pointing to the inner drama within every man. Likewise, in legends where a woman is visited by a god, a warrior, or a mysterious masculine figure, Jung saw the animus at work, shaping her relationship with her own depths and with the outer world. In dreams, the anima and animus often appear during times of transition. A man may dream of a woman who guides him into a new landscape, or who confronts him with uncomfortable truths. A woman may dream of a man who speaks with authority, or who challenges her to step beyond her limitations. These encounters are symbolic, the psyche's way of expressing the need for integration, for balance between its inner currents. Jung also saw the anima and animus as bridges. They connect the ego to the self, the conscious to the unconscious. To ignore them is to cut off the possibility of dialogue with the depths. To recognize and integrate them is to gain access to wisdom beyond the reach of ordinary thought. But he warned of the dangers. A man possessed by his anima may become moody, irrational, entangled in fantasies. A woman possessed by her animus may become rigid, argumentative, consumed by abstract opinions that lose touch with reality. The task is not to suppress these figures, but to engage them, to bring them into awareness, to form a conscious relationship with them. In practical life, this means recognizing the qualities we often project onto others. A man may be enchanted by a woman, not because of who she truly is, but because she carries for him the projection of his own anima. A woman may idealize or despise a man because he carries the projection of her animus. Relationships often become distorted when we mistake these inner figures for external reality. Jung believed that by recognizing the anima and animus within, we free others from carrying the burden of our unconscious projections, and we begin to relate more honestly. As you lie here now, listening, perhaps you can sense the presence of these inner figures within yourself. They may not have faces or names, but their energies flow quietly beneath your thoughts. The gentle, feeling side of you, attuned to beauty, emotion, and connection that is anima energy. The firm, decisive side of you, oriented toward clarity and action that is animus energy. Both are part of you. Both are necessary. In the stillness of night, Jung would encourage you to imagine these forces not as enemies, but as companions. Let the anima and animus meet. Let them speak. Let them dance. When they are reconciled, when the inner marriage of feminine and masculine takes place, a new level of wholeness arises. The soul becomes less divided, less at war with itself. It begins to move toward harmony, toward balance, toward a completeness that neither side can achieve alone. And so, drifting into rest, you might imagine yourself walking in a dream, and ahead of you stands a figure. They may appear familiar, or strange, or clothed in symbols you cannot yet understand. Whoever they are part of you, the hidden feminine, the hidden masculine, waiting to be acknowledged, to be honored, to be integrated into the story of your becoming. Beyond the masks, beyond the shadow, beyond even the anima and animus, lies the deepest mystery of Jung's psychology. He called it the self. The self is not the ego, the everyday I, that makes decisions, remembers the past, and plans for the future. The ego is only one small part of the psyche, like a single candle lit against the vastness of the night. The self is the whole, the totality of the conscious and unconscious together, the complete pattern of who we are and who we might become. Jung saw the self as both the center and the circumference of the psyche. It is like a great circle within which the ego is contained. The ego believes it rules, but in truth it moves within the larger design of the self, which guides the soul toward wholeness. This process Jung called individuation, the unfolding journey by which a person becomes more fully themselves, not merely a bundle of roles or repressed desires, but an integrated being. In dreams and myths, the self often appears as symbols of unity and completion. The mandala, the circle, the divine child, the wise old man or woman, the figure of Christ or Buddha. These images are not literal. They are expressions of the archetype of the self, the psyche's way of depicting the goal of inner development. Whenever people throughout history have sought images of harmony, of reconciliation of opposites, of transcendent wholeness, they have touched upon the archetype of the self. The ego, however, resists this. The ego fears losing control. It clings to its illusions of mastery, believing itself to be the whole story of the individual. But Jung insisted that the ego is only a small island in the ocean of the psyche. To awaken to the self is to realize that you are more than the voice in your head, more than your fleeting thoughts and moods. You are part of a greater pattern, a living whole that stretches beyond what you consciously know. Jung's own encounter with the self was intense and transformative. During his years of visions, he often saw images of mandalas, circular patterns that seemed to arise spontaneously from his unconscious. He began to draw them, paint them, study them, and he realized that they represented an ordering principle within the psyche. The self, he concluded, seeks expression, seeks balance, seeks to draw the fragments of the personality into harmony. But the path to the self is not easy. It requires confrontation with the shadow, acknowledgement of the anima and animus, a loosening of the grip of the persona. It requires descent into the unconscious, acceptance of paradox, the willingness to be changed. Jung believed that individuation often unfolds through crisis, through the breakdown of old certainties, through suffering that strips away illusions. Yet out of this struggle emerges a greater wholeness, a deeper sense of meaning, a reconciliation of the opposites that divide the soul. To approach the self is to encounter the numinous, the sense of the sacred, the mysteriously powerful. Jung was not afraid to use religious language, though he insisted he was speaking psychologically. He saw the self as the imago Dei, the image of God within, the spark of the divine that guides each person toward fulfillment. For him, the experience of the self was not an abstract concept, but a living reality, encountered in dreams, visions, and synchronicities that pointed beyond the ordinary. The self is both within and beyond us. It is personal and universal, the deepest truth of who we are, and the link that connects us to all humanity. To live in harmony with the self is to live authentically, to follow a path that feels guided not by ego's ambition, but by the soul's deeper calling. As you lie here now, listening, breathing softly, perhaps you can sense this deeper presence within you, not a voice that shouts, but a quiet center, steady and timeless. Perhaps you can imagine it as a circle of light, or as the calm surface of a lake, reflecting everything yet belonging to nothing. This is the self, not an idea, not a role, but the wholeness that has always been within you, waiting to be realized. To surrender to sleep is in some sense to surrender to the self. The ego relaxes, the conscious mind dissolves, and the unconscious rises. In dreams, the self may speak, weaving symbols that point you toward greater integration. In silence, the self may restore balance, healing what the ego cannot. Jung's vision of the self was ultimately hopeful. He believed that every life, no matter how troubled, carries within it the potential for wholeness. The self is not something we create. It is something already there, like a seed waiting to unfold, like a melody already written that the soul learns to play. The journey of life is the journey toward that unfolding, toward becoming what we truly are. And so, as you drift deeper now, let the ego's chatter fade. Let the day dissolve. Somewhere within, the self waits, patient, luminous, whole. Trust that it guides you, even in darkness, even in dreams. Trust that beyond the fragments, beyond the masks and shadows, there is a wholeness greater than you can imagine, and it is already yours. There are times in life when the outer world grows quiet, and in that silence, the inner world begins to roar. For Carl Jung, this turning inward happened after his painful break with Freud, when the friendships, theories, and professional structures that had once defined him began to collapse. Outwardly, he was still respected, still practicing as a physician, still seen as a man of learning. But inwardly, he entered what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. For years, Jung lived in a strange twilight, where visions poured into him with such intensity that he sometimes feared for his sanity. Out of this descent came a manuscript he worked on in secret, a book bound in red leather, filled with paintings, dialogues, and strange mythic stories. He called it simply Liber Novus, the New Book. To the world, it would be known as the Red Book. Jung did not intend this book as a polished theory or a finished treatise. It was more like a diary of the soul, a record of his descent into the depths. He would sit quietly, allow images to rise from the unconscious, and then engage with them, as if they were real. He called this process active imagination. Instead of dismissing the figures that appeared to him, he spoke to them, asked them questions, recorded their answers. He treated the images as living presences, embodiments of archetypal forces, what many would have called hallucinations. Jung treated as encounters with the deepest parts of the psyche. In the Red Book, he describes meeting figures both terrifying and wise. He speaks of a serpent, of an old man, of a soul who appeared as a woman and called herself Salome. He wanders through deserts and caverns, speaks with mythic beings, wrestles with gods and demons that arise from within. His paintings, rich in color and intricate design, depict mandalas, strange landscapes, and symbolic scenes that feel at once ancient and new. To read the book is to step into a dream that he lived consciously, night after night, year after year. For Jung, these visions were not mere fantasy. They were revelations of the collective unconscious, the great ocean of symbols that underlies human life. He believed that by engaging these figures, he was participating in the same mythic drama that had always shaped humanity, only now it was unfolding inside his own soul. He often feared that he might lose himself, that he might drown in these images, but he also knew that to refuse them would be to cut himself off from his own depths. The work was so private, so personal, that Jung kept it hidden for most of his life. Only a few close colleagues ever saw glimpses of it. He feared that publishing it would make him appear insane, that the world would dismiss his professional authority if it knew how far into the unconscious he had ventured. And so, he locked the red leather book away, working on it in secret, returning to it when the visions demanded expression. What makes the Red Book extraordinary is not only the visions themselves, but Jung's courage in confronting them. Most people, when faced with such intensity from within, would turn away, distract themselves, or seek to suppress the experiences. Jung instead allowed himself to be led by them, even when they unsettled him. He trusted that the unconscious was not only a source of madness, but also of healing. By engaging it directly, by entering dialogue with its figures, he believed he was participating in the process of individuation, the movement toward wholeness. The language of the Red Book is poetic, prophetic, often strange. It reads less like psychology and more like scripture, filled with voices that cry out from the depths of the soul. Jung himself admitted that he did not fully understand what he had written. It was not meant to be systematized. It was meant to be lived, to be contemplated like a dream whose meaning unfolds slowly over time. When the book was finally published, decades after his death, many were astonished by its beauty and its strangeness. Scholars saw in it the seedbed of many of Jung's later ideas. The archetypes, the collective unconscious, the process of individuation. But readers also saw the vulnerability of a man willing to record his own descent, willing to share the nights of vision that nearly broke him. As you drift into sleep now, imagine yourself holding a heavy red book. Its pages are thick, covered with images painted in vivid hues, words written in careful calligraphy. You turn a page, and a dream unfolds. A serpent winds across the page. A figure steps forward and begins to speak. You do not fully understand, but you know that it is important, that it is yours. This is how Jung experienced his red book, page after page of visions, messages from the depths. The lesson of the red book is not that we must all paint our dreams or engage in such radical visions. It is that the psyche is alive, and if we listen, it speaks. The images we fear, the voices we deny, may hold within them not only our madness but our medicine. Jung dared to listen, and though the descent was perilous, it gave him insights that continue to guide people to this day. And so tonight, as the unconscious begins to stir within you, remember that the dream world is not an enemy. It is a book, written in a language of images, waiting to be read. Human beings are creatures of meaning. We look at the world around us and see patterns where others might see chaos. We find significance in the turn of events, in the chance meeting, in the dream that seems to echo life. Jung believed that this capacity was not illusion, but revelation. He devoted much of his thought to the way symbols speak and to the phenomenon he called synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence. A symbol, Jung said, is not merely a sign. A sign points to something known, something fixed, like a road sign pointing to a town. A symbol, by contrast, points beyond itself. It represents something greater than can be expressed in words, something infinite touching the finite. Religious icons, mandalas, alchemical images, dreams, all are filled with symbols that open the psyche to realities it cannot grasp rationally. In dreams, symbols appear unbidden. A mountain might represent the climb toward greater consciousness. A snake might embody transformation or danger. A child might symbolize new potential, the birth of something fresh within. The meaning is not always obvious. Symbols are layered, ambiguous, open to exploration. To Jung, this was their power. A symbol cannot be exhausted by explanation. It continues to speak, to reveal, to unfold, meaning over time. But Jung's fascination with symbols did not stop at dreams. He noticed how symbols emerged in myths, in art, in religious rituals across cultures. The cross, the circle, the tree, the fountain again and again. Humanity returned to the same images, as if guided by an unconscious that speaks in pictures. For Jung, to live symbolically was to live connected to the deeper layers of the psyche, to honor the mystery of existence, rather than reducing everything to cold logic. And then there was synchronicity. Jung described synchronicity as a causal connecting principle, a way that inner and outer events align in meaningful patterns without one directly causing the other. The famous example is the scarab beetle. A patient was describing a dream in which she was given a golden scarab. As she spoke, Jung heard a tapping at the window. He opened it, and a scarab beetle, rare in that climate, flew into the room. The coincidence jolted the patient. The image from her unconscious had appeared in outer reality, as if the world itself had conspired to confirm the dream. To a skeptic, it might seem like chance. To Jung, it was a revelation of how psyche and world are intertwined. The unconscious does not only live inside us, it is connected to the fabric of reality. And sometimes, that connection shows itself in coincidences too striking to ignore. He collected many such examples. A person dreaming of a friend, just as the friend calls, a symbolic image, appearing in both a vision and an external event, a pattern repeating in such a way that it seems to carry intention. Jung did not claim to fully understand how synchronicity works. He saw it as a mystery, a sign that meaning is woven into the universe at a deeper level than cause and effect. For those who experience it, synchronicity feels numinous, charged with significance. It often happens at moments of transition, crisis, or inner growth times, when the unconscious is especially active. To encounter it is to feel that the boundary between inner and outer has thinned, that life is speaking in the same symbolic language as dreams. As you listen now, think of the moments in your own life when coincidence felt like more than chance. Perhaps a song played at the exact moment you needed to hear it. Perhaps you stumbled upon a book that spoke directly to your unspoken questions. Perhaps you met someone who arrived in your life just when you were ready for change. These are moments Jung would call synchronistic. They remind us that life is not only random, not only mechanical, but imbued with meaning that reveals itself mysteriously. Jung urged his patients and his readers to pay attention to these moments, not to dismiss them. To him, they were glimpses of the self, the larger pattern of wholeness making itself known. Symbols and synchronicities are like lanterns left along the path, guiding the traveler through the forest of the psyche. They do not give simple answers, but they whisper of order, of connection, of mystery, and from. And so, as you drift into sleep, remember that the dreams you will enter are filled with symbols, and that the waking world too can speak in this language if you are attentive. Life is not mute. It speaks, sometimes softly, sometimes with startling clarity. Symbols in dreams, synchronicities in waking both, are ways that meaning reveals itself, ways that the soul reminds you that you are part of a greater pattern. When a person begins to see what others cannot, their vision does not always bring admiration. More often, it brings suspicion, fear, or outright hostility. Jung understood this deeply. He knew that the psyche carries truths that lie beyond the boundaries of convention, and that those who attempt to speak of them risk being misunderstood. To see too far into the unconscious, or to bring back images that threaten the order of society, is to walk a dangerous path. Visionaries are rarely welcomed at first. They disrupt the settled stories, they challenge the comfortable illusions, and they remind others of things they would rather not face. From the beginning of human history, visionaries have occupied an uneasy place. The prophet who dreams of coming disaster, the poet who sings of hidden truths, the shaman who wanders into the spirit world. Such figures often inspire awe, but they also unsettle the community. For what they reveal cannot always be measured, verified, or neatly explained. It stirs anxiety because it points to forces larger than reason, forces that disrupt the fragile sense of control. Jung himself experienced this resistance. When he spoke of the collective unconscious, of archetypes, of synchronicity, many of his colleagues dismissed him as mystical, unscientific, even delusional. They wanted psychology to remain tethered to the observable, the measurable. Jung insisted that the psyche cannot be reduced to statistics or laboratory tests. It lives in symbols, in dreams, in meaning. By daring to take these seriously, he stepped outside the accepted boundaries of his time, and in doing so, he risked the isolation that often comes to those who see differently. Why does society resist vision? Part of the reason lies in fear. Most people construct their lives on a foundation of shared assumptions about morality, about religion, about reason, about the nature of reality itself. These assumptions create stability. They allow people to cooperate, to communicate, to feel secure. When someone introduces a vision that calls those assumptions into question, the foundation trembles. To admit the possibility that reality is stranger, deeper, more mysterious than expected, is to feel the ground shift beneath one's feet. The easier path is to dismiss the visionary, to call them mad, to exile them from the circle. Another reason lies in envy. The visionary has access to something others do not. They see symbols that speak of transformation. They perceive connections that ordinary eyes miss. This difference creates unease. People may feel left behind, excluded from a kind of secret knowledge. Rather than face their own limitations, they attack the visionary, demanding conformity, pulling them back into the collective fold. Jung saw this dynamic in the fate of many of his patients. Those who experienced powerful dreams or sudden insights often felt alienated from their families and communities. Their visions did not fit into the ordinary framework of conversation. They struggled to explain themselves, and when they did, they met resistance or ridicule. Jung encouraged them to value their inner experience, even when society could not yet understand it. He warned that suppressing vision for the sake of conformity leads to neurosis. The soul does not tolerate being silenced for long. But the danger of vision is not only external, it is also internal. Those who see differently risk becoming inflated, identifying themselves with the vision, rather than remaining humble before it. Jung often warned of the peril of archetypal possession. To see too deeply into the unconscious is to risk being overwhelmed by its magnitude, mistaking oneself for a prophet or savior, forgetting the limits of human understanding. True vision requires balance, enough courage to follow the images where they lead, but enough humility to remember that they are not yours alone, that they are part of the collective inheritance of humanity. History shows this tension again and again. Socrates, condemned for corrupting the youth with his questions. Mystics, persecuted for speaking of union with the divine outside of sanctioned institutions. Artists, censored for depicting truths that society was not ready to face. Again and again, those who see differently must endure suspicion. And yet, in time, their vision often reshapes the world, expanding the very boundaries that once resisted them. For Jung, the danger of vision was part of the human journey. To become more whole requires confronting realities that others may not yet accept. It requires the courage to live by inner truth, even when it does not align with collective opinion. But he urged caution. One must not flaunt vision as superiority, nor use it to escape from the responsibilities of ordinary life. The visionary path is not about rejecting society entirely, but about holding the tension between inner insight and outer reality. As you listen now, perhaps you sense the resonance of this struggle in your own life. There may have been times when you felt something others did not, when you dreamed dreams that seemed to speak of more than yourself, when you glimpsed meaning that others brushed aside. These moments may have left you feeling isolated, unsure whether to trust what you had seen. Jung would tell you that such visions matter, but that they must be held with care. They are precious, but also perilous. They can open the way to growth, but they can also separate you from the comfort of belonging. And so, the danger of vision is both gift and trial. It is the fire that illuminates, and the fire that burns. To see differently is to carry a responsibility not to impose the vision on others, not to seek glory in being exceptional, but to honor the truth that has revealed itself, and to live it quietly, faithfully, with patience. The night deepens. The world grows quieter. In this silence, the images of the unconscious may stir. Some will comfort you, some may disturb you, but all belong to the vast story of the human soul. If you can hold them gently, neither dismissing nor clinging too tightly, then you walk the path Jung himself walked. The narrow road between conformity and madness, between silence and revelation, where vision is both danger and possibility. The line between madness and revelation is delicate, almost invisible. Jung knew this better than most. During his confrontation with the unconscious, he sometimes feared he was descending into psychosis. The images were overwhelming. Visions of floods, gods, serpents, and prophets, speaking with voices that shook his very sense of self. At times, he confessed, he wondered whether he was losing his mind. And yet, out of that same descent came the seeds of his greatest insights: the collective unconscious, the archetypes, the process of individuation. What distinguished madness from revelation, Jung believed, was not the content of the experience, but the way it was lived. Madness occurs when the ego is swept away, when the conscious mind cannot contain the flood of unconscious material. The visions take over, the symbols dominate, and the person is no longer able to distinguish between inner and outer reality. They lose the ground of ordinary life, and with it, the ability to function. Revelation, by contrast, occurs when the ego can engage the unconscious without being destroyed by it. The visions still come, but the person can observe them, reflect on them, integrate them into their life. The key is relationship, holding the images, not being possessed by them. Jung saw this distinction again and again in his clinical work. Patients who experienced hallucinations or delusions often reported material strikingly similar to the symbols he found in myths and religion. Their minds were touching the same archetypal realities he himself encountered. But because they had no framework, no ability to contain or interpret the experience, it overwhelmed them. They were drowning in the sea of the collective unconscious. Jung, by contrast, had a rope tied to the shore. His discipline as a doctor, his grounding in study, his willingness to record and reflect, all of this allowed him to swim in those waters without being lost. He insisted that what we call psychosis often contains a core of meaning. The visions are not random. They are expressions of the unconscious, attempting to speak in symbolic form. The tragedy is that the message is lost because the ego cannot withstand the force of it. In this sense, madness and revelation are not entirely separate. They are two outcomes of the same encounter with the unconscious. One destroys, the other transforms. To walk this boundary requires humility and courage, too much pride, and one identifies with the vision, believing oneself to be a prophet or savior, too much fear, and one represses the vision, denying it until it erupts uncontrollably. Jung counseled finding the middle way, to take the images seriously but not literally, to honor them as symbols but not to mistake them for absolute reality. This is why he practiced active imagination, entering dialogue with the figures of his unconscious while always returning to ordinary life, to his family, his work, his community. He lived in both worlds, refusing to abandon either. The world often conflates visionary experience with madness. A person who speaks of dreams, of voices, of symbols, may be dismissed as delusional. And indeed, sometimes the experience is pathological, requiring care and healing. But Jung urged us not to throw away the meaning contained within. Even in madness, he believed, the soul is speaking. The task of therapy is not only to suppress symptoms, but to listen for the message hidden within the chaos. Consider the myths of ancient cultures. The shaman often underwent an initiatory illness, a period of madness, before emerging as healer and guide. The prophets of old withdrew into the desert, wrestled with visions, and returned with messages for their people. To modernize, these experiences resemble psychosis, and yet, in their cultural context, they were understood as revelation, as a necessary descent into the depths before rebirth. Jung saw his own experience in this light. His confrontation with the unconscious nearly broke him, but because he engaged it consciously, it became the source of his life's work. As you rest now, breathing slowly, perhaps you can sense this boundary within yourself. At night, in dreams, you may be visited by images that seem strange, irrational, even frightening. They may feel like madness, yet they may carry meaning if you can hold them gently, if you can reflect on them without panic. Jung would tell you not to dismiss them, nor to be consumed by them, but to recognize them as part of the dialogue between conscious and unconscious. Madness or revelation. The difference lies in relationship. If the ego is crushed, madness follows. If the ego can stand in dialogue, revelation unfolds. Both are born from the same source, the deep ocean of the unconscious, forever seeking to bring its wisdom into the light of awareness. Tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, remember that the images that come are not there to harm you. They are part of the psyche's endless attempt to speak, to balance, to heal. If they feel overwhelming, know that this is natural, for the unconscious is vast. But also know that you are more than the flood. You are the one who can listen, who can record, who can reflect. In this lies the possibility of revelation, the chance to transform even the strangest visions into steps along the path toward wholeness. All of us live two lives. There is the life we show to others, the one measured by visible achievements, responsibilities, and the long rhythm of days. And there is another life, quieter, deeper, unfolding within us. Jung called this inner journey individuation the process of becoming whole, of reconciling the many parts of the psyche, and of discovering the self that lies beyond the ego. He believed that this was not a task for a moment, nor even for a single decade, but the work of a lifetime. And he often described it as a journey, much like the myths of old, a hero's quest, only one that unfolds inwardly. The hero's journey in myth often begins with a call. A messenger arrives, or a strange event disrupts ordinary life, or the hero feels a stirring dissatisfaction that cannot be ignored. In the same way, individuation begins when a person senses that the outer life is no longer enough, when they begin to feel restless, unfulfilled, haunted by dreams or moods that point to something beyond daily routine. It is as though the unconscious whispers, "There is more to you than this." But just as the hero in myth often resists the call, so too do we resist the summons of individuation. It is easier to remain in familiar roles, to hide within the persona, to deny the shadow, to live according to collective expectations. Yet life has a way of pressing us forward. Crises arise, relationships falter, dreams disturb us, symptoms break through. These are the heralds of the journey, forcing us to step into the unknown. Once the hero accepts the call, the adventure begins. In myth, this often involves leaving home, crossing a threshold into a strange world filled with trials and guardians. For Jung, the strange world is the unconscious. To enter it is to encounter symbols, archetypes, and forgotten memories that test and transform us. The shadow may appear as a terrifying figure, the anima or animus as a guide or a seducer. Dreams become maps of this territory, showing us what we must face. The hero does not travel alone. Along the way, allies appear, figures who aid the quest. In the inner journey, allies may take the form of supportive relationships, books that speak to our soul, synchronicities that affirm our path. They may also be inner figures, archetypal presences that guide us through visions or dreams. These allies remind us that though the path is solitary, It is not entirely lonely, yet no hero escapes trials. In myths, the hero must face monsters, descend into caves, endure ordeals that test courage and humility. In individuation, these trials often take the form of crises, illness, loss, betrayal, depression. The psyche strips away illusions, forcing us to confront our own darkness. We discover that we are not as pure, not as strong, not as wise as we believed. This confrontation is painful, but necessary. Without it, the hero remains untested, untransformed. At the heart of the journey lies the great ordeal, the confrontation with the deepest truth of oneself. In myth, this is often symbolized by the descent into the underworld, the face-to-face meeting with death, the encounter with the dragon or the god. In individuation, it is the recognition of the self. The ego realizes that it is not the center of the psyche, that it is but one part of a greater whole. This realization can feel like death to the ego, but it is also the beginning of new life. The hero then returns. In myth, the journey does not end with victory. The hero brings back the boon, the treasure, the wisdom to share with the community. In individuation, the task is to return to ordinary life transformed. The insights of the unconscious are not to be hoarded in isolation, but lived out in daily existence. The integrated person moves through the world with greater authenticity, humility, and compassion. They embody the wholeness they have glimpsed. But Jung emphasized that individuation is not a single quest with a neat ending. It is a spiral, unfolding across a lifetime. Again and again, we are called deeper. Again and again, we face new shadows, new trials, new revelations. Each stage of life carries its own tasks. Youth, with its search for identity. Midlife, with its confrontation with meaning. Old age, with its preparation for death. At each stage, the journey continues. As you listen now, imagine yourself as the hero of your own inner story. The call may already have come. Perhaps it arrived as a dream, a crisis, a restless yearning. Perhaps you are in the midst of trials, facing your shadow, wrestling with contradictions. Or perhaps you are carrying the treasure of insight, beginning to live it quietly in your daily world. Wherever you are on the path. The journey is not linear. It is not judged by outward success. It is measured by the depth with which you engage your own soul. To fall asleep tonight is itself a kind of journey. The ego rests, and you cross a threshold into the dream world. There you may encounter guides, shadows, ordeals. There you may find hints of the self calling you onward. And when you wake, you return, carrying fragments of treasure to weave into the fabric of your waking life. The hero's journey within is not about glory or conquest. It is about wholeness. It is about becoming who you truly are, not who society demands. Not who the ego pretends, but the deeper self that has been waiting all along. This is the lifelong adventure Jung invites you to walk. The quiet, patient work of individuation. The heroic journey of the soul toward wholeness. In the dim laboratories of the Middle Ages, alchemists labored over their furnaces, seeking to transform base metals into gold. To the modern eye, their work seems misguided, even absurd. But Jung saw something deeper in their strange symbols and cryptic texts. He believed that alchemy was not merely a primitive chemistry, but a symbolic language of the psyche. The alchemists, without knowing it, were describing the process of psychological transformation, the way suffering, when embraced, can be turned into wisdom, just as lead is transmuted into gold. Jung discovered alchemy later in his career, and when he did, He felt as though he had stumbled upon a forgotten mirror of his own work. The images of alchemy, fire, vessels, dissolutions, unions, reflected the same processes he observed in the psyche. The alchemists spoke of nigredo, the blackening, when matter decays and disintegrates. Jung saw in this the experience of despair, the dark night of the soul when old structures collapse. They spoke of albedo, the whitening, when purification begins, and he saw in it the dawning of insight. They described rubedo, the reddening, when new life emerges, when opposites unite, when the philosopher's stone is formed. For Jung, this was the moment of integration, when the self shines forth. Suffering plays a central role in this alchemical process. Just as base matter must be subjected to fire, so too must the human soul be tested by pain. Jung did not romanticize suffering, but he believed it had meaning. To repress it, to deny it, is to remain untransformed. To endure it consciously, to engage it, is to allow the fire to burn away illusion, to reveal the deeper substance of the soul. He often saw this in his patients. Those who came to him were often broken by life loss, depression, conflict. At first, they longed only to escape their pain, to return to comfort. But Jung encouraged them to face their suffering, to enter it as an alchemist enters the furnace. He believed that within the suffering lay the seed of transformation. Depression, for example, might signal the collapse of an old way of life, making space for something new to emerge. Anxiety might be the pressure of the unconscious demanding recognition. If engaged, these symptoms could guide a person toward growth. The language of alchemy provided images for this painful but necessary process. The vessel, sealed and heated, symbolized the containment of psychic energy, the discipline of staying with suffering rather than fleeing from it. The dissolution, where forms break apart, reflected the loss of certainty, the breakdown of old identities. The conjunctio, the mystical union of opposites, symbolized the reconciliation of divided parts of the psyche, the meeting of shadow and ego, of anima and animus, of spirit and matter. For Jung, alchemy was a map of individuation. It showed that transformation is not clean or easy. It is messy, dark, and often agonizing. But out of the darkness, new light emerges. The gold that results is not literal. It is the wholeness of the self, the wisdom gained by enduring suffering consciously. As you lie here now, perhaps you can think of your own life as an alchemical process. There may have been times of nigredo, when everything seemed dark, when meaning collapsed, when you felt broken. These were not failures. They were the beginning of transformation. In time, perhaps you have known moments of albedo, when clarity dawned, when you felt cleansed, renewed, lighter. And perhaps you have tasted rubedo, when opposites reconciled, when you felt more whole, more alive. This cycle continues throughout life. Each descent into darkness carries within it the possibility of new light. The alchemists sought gold, but Jung taught that the true gold is the soul transformed, the human being who has faced suffering and emerged wiser, more compassionate, more whole. To avoid suffering is to remain base matter. To endure it, to work with it, is to become luminous. Tonight, as you surrender to rest, imagine your own soul as the vessel. The day's troubles are the fire, heating the contents. Dreams will come, stirring the mixture, dissolving old forms, combining new ones. Slowly, imperceptibly, transformation unfolds. You may not see it in the morning, or even in the year, but over time, the alchemy of the soul continues, turning suffering into wisdom, darkness into light, lead into gold. When the world quiets and your eyes close. The unconscious begins to speak. Most people think of dreams as fleeting, strange stories, irrelevant fragments of imagination. But for Jung, dreams were not empty illusions. They were messages, subtle, symbolic, and deeply practical, sent from the unconscious to the conscious mind. He called them the natural expression of the psyche, unfiltered by reason, carrying truths that waking thought often resists. Dreams, Jung believed, serve as guides. They balance us when our conscious life becomes one-sided. They warn us when we ignore essential parts of ourselves, and they show us possibilities we have yet to consider. Where our conscious mind insists on certainty and control, dreams move with fluidity, speaking in a symbolic language that cannot be confined to logic. They tell us what we most need to know, though rarely in the form we expect. Imagine someone who prides themselves on being rational, efficient, and in control. They may dream of being lost in a chaotic marketplace, unable to find their way. This is not a meaningless story. It is the unconscious reminding them of their neglected side. The need for spontaneity, humility, or vulnerability. Another person, overwhelmed by fear of failure, may dream of climbing a mountain, struggling yet steadily moving upward. This is the unconscious offering encouragement, showing that persistence carries them forward even when doubt dominates waking thought. For Jung, dreams are like nightly letters written to the self. Each one carries information meant for the dreamer alone. They are not abstract riddles with universal answers. They are intimate conversations between the unconscious and the individual. To dismiss them is to tear up the letter unread. To honor them is to enter into dialogue with the deepest part of oneself. He encouraged people not to treat dreams as puzzles to be solved mechanically, but as companions to be lived with. A dream is not exhausted by one interpretation. Its meaning may unfold over months or years. Jung often advised drawing or painting dream images, allowing the psyche to continue the conversation in color and form. By creating, the dreamer keeps the image alive, allowing it to reveal layers of meaning beyond words. Dreams can be profoundly practical. Jung described cases where a dream gave clear advice that transformed a patient's life. A man trapped in an unhealthy career might dream of a locked door suddenly opening to reveal a path through the forest. The message was simple: freedom is possible, but only if he dares to leave behind what confines him. A woman struggling in a relationship might dream of a child crying in the corner, reminding her that her neglected inner life is calling for attention. Dreams may appear mysterious, but their wisdom often speaks directly to the heart of our difficulties. Sometimes dreams challenge us with images that disturb or frighten us. Nightmares, Jung said, are not punishments but urgent messages. They arise when the unconscious must break through the resistance of the ego. A recurring nightmare of being chased may reflect an aspect of the shadow that the dreamer refuses to acknowledge. By turning toward the pursuer in imagination, by asking what it wants, the dreamer may discover a neglected strength or a truth long denied. Even the darkest dreams carry meaning, if we dare to listen. But dreams are not only corrective, they are also creative. Many artists, scientists, and thinkers have drawn inspiration from dreams. Jung himself recorded dreams that contained mandalas, circular images of balance and wholeness, long before he consciously understood their significance. He realized that the unconscious is not only a storehouse of memory, but also a source of imagination and innovation. To attend to dreams is to tap into this wellspring of creativity. Practical wisdom from dreams often unfolds in symbolic form. If we treat the symbol literally, we may miss its meaning. To dream of death, for instance, rarely means physical death. More often, it symbolizes the end of a phase, the closing of an old pattern, so that new life may emerge. To dream of water may symbolize the unconscious itself, flowing and unfathomable, inviting the dreamer to immerse themselves in feelings long avoided. Symbols speak in layers. They cannot be reduced to a dictionary of meanings. They require the dreamer's active participation, their willingness to reflect and engage. Jung urged patience. The unconscious does not shout. It whispers, night after night, in symbols and fragments. To build a relationship with dreams is to build a relationship with the soul itself. It requires consistency, humility, and openness. One does not demand answers from a dream. One listens, reflects, and waits. Over time, patterns emerge, connections form, and the guidance becomes clear. As you lie here tonight, your own dreams will come. Some may be gentle, some may be strange, some may be difficult. All of them belong to you. All of them carry meaning. They are your nightly guides, your private teachers, your companions on the path of individuation. If you can remember them in the morning, write them down, honor them, carry them with you. They are gifts from the unconscious, reminders that the psyche itself longs for wholeness and will guide you toward it if you are willing to listen. So, as sleep deepens, let yourself imagine that you are about to enter a conversation. The unconscious will speak, not in sentences, but in images. You may not understand right away, but understanding is not always the point. What matters is that you listen, that you allow the guidance to reach you, that you trust the wisdom of dreams. No one lives in isolation. From the moment we are born, we are held, spoken to, and shaped by others. Our relationships become the stage on which our inner dramas are enacted. Jung observed that what we see in others is often a mirror of what lies within ourselves. We project our unconscious contents outward, and in doing so, we meet them in the faces of the people around us. This is both a gift and a danger. When we fall in love, for example, we may believe we have found someone extraordinary, unlike anyone else in the world. Yet Jung would say that much of what we see in the beloved is our own anima or animus, projected outward. The qualities that captivate us, mystery, strength, tenderness, wisdom, are often inner potentials we have not yet recognized in ourselves. The other becomes a mirror, reflecting our own depths back to us. Love, then, is not only about the other person, but also about the parts of the self that awaken through them. But projection does not only happen in love, it happens in conflict as well. The traits we most despise in others often reveal aspects of our own shadow. The arrogance of a colleague, the selfishness of a friend, the coldness of a stranger. These may irritate us precisely because they echo qualities we deny in ourselves. Instead of owning them, we cast them outward, fighting them in others. Relationships thus become battlegrounds where our unacknowledged parts clash under the illusion of external conflict. To recognize projection is to take back responsibility. When we realize that what we see in others often comes from within, relationships transform. The enemy becomes a teacher, the beloved, a mirror, the stranger, a symbol. This does not mean that others are mere illusions or that their behavior does not matter, but it means that every relationship carries within it an inner dimension, an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. Jung believed that individuation is not achieved in isolation, but through relationship. The psyche seeks wholeness not only within, but also through the exchange with others. The family, the community, the partner, the friend, all provide mirrors in which we see ourselves more clearly. Each encounter is a chance to meet the unconscious, to discover what has been hidden, to integrate what has been denied. At times, this process is painful. To realize that our anger toward another reveals our own shadow requires humility. To admit that the beauty we adore in another is also ours to cultivate demands courage. Relationships often stir intense emotions because they touch the deepest layers of the psyche. They awaken archetypal dynamics. The parent, the child, the lover, the rival. These patterns play out in daily life, carrying both danger and potential for transformation. In his work with patients, Jung often encouraged them to pay attention to the emotions that arose in relationship. Who makes you angry? Who fascinates you? Who frightens you? Each strong emotion is a clue, a signal pointing to unconscious material. Instead of blaming the other entirely, Jung urged reflection. What does this reveal about me? What part of myself am I seeing, disowned, and disguised in this person? This does not mean we must accept abuse or harmful behavior. Jung was clear that boundaries are essential. But even in conflict, he believed, the psyche offers lessons. The challenge is to balance outer reality with inner truth, to respond appropriately to others while also reflecting on the mirror they hold up to us. Over time, this awareness deepens relationships. When we no longer expect others to carry our projections, we begin to see them more clearly, as they truly are. Love becomes less about idealization and more about genuine connection. Conflict becomes less about blame and more about shared growth. Friendship becomes a space of mutual reflection, where two souls help each other see more deeply. As you drift now into the softness of rest, think of the people in your life as mirrors. Each one reflects something back to you, sometimes light, sometimes shadow, sometimes hidden treasure. You do not need to judge these reflections harshly. Simply notice them. Notice what they awaken in you. Notice how they shape your journey toward wholeness. In the quiet of sleep, dreams may bring you faces of those you know, or even strangers you have never met. Jung would tell you that these figures, too, are mirrors of your inner world. They are parts of you, wearing the masks of others, appearing to guide you, to challenge you, to teach you. If you listen, if you reflect, you may discover that every relationship, both in waking and in dreams, is a doorway to self-knowledge. And so, relationships are not only about others. They are about you, your projections, your shadow, your anima and animus, your self-longing for balance. Every person you meet carries within them the possibility of revelation. To live with this awareness is to see the world itself as a mirror, endlessly reflecting the soul. From the earliest fires lit in the caves of our ancestors, human beings have told stories about gods, about heroes, about the mysteries of life and death. These stories, carried through myth and religion, have guided civilizations for thousands of years. To the modern mind, they are often dismissed as superstition or fable, but Jung believed they were something far greater. He saw in religion and myth the expression of the collective unconscious itself, the symbolic language through which humanity has always tried to describe the deepest realities of the psyche. Jung approached religion not as a theologian, nor as an enemy of faith, but as a psychologist who understood that the human soul craves meaning. He observed that when people turned away from myth and religion, they did not stop needing symbols. Instead, they sought them in distorted forms: political ideologies, collective movements, obsessions with science or technology. He believed that the images of myth and the rituals of religion served a crucial function. They gave shape to the archetypal forces within us. They offered a container for the numinous, that overwhelming sense of the sacred that emerges when the unconscious touches consciousness. For Jung, myths were not lies. They were truths expressed in symbolic form. The stories of creation, the journeys of gods into the underworld, the trials of heroes. These were not primitive misunderstandings of the world. They were maps of the soul. They revealed the patterns of individuation, the encounters with shadow and guide, the reconciliation of opposites, the transformation of suffering into meaning. Myths endure because they resonate with archetypes that belong to all humanity. Take, for example, the myth of the hero's descent into darkness. Whether it is Orpheus venturing into the underworld, Christ descending to the dead, or countless other variations across cultures, the story is the same. To find life, one must first pass through death. Jung saw in this the psychological truth that individuation requires us to confront the unconscious, to endure despair, to face our shadow, before we can emerge transformed. The myth externalizes this inner journey, allowing entire cultures to recognize and honor what each individual must face within. Religious rituals served a similar function. Baptism, sacrifice, initiation ceremonies. These were not arbitrary customs, but symbolic enactments of inner processes. They gave the individual a way to participate consciously in the transformations of the soul. In modern life, where such rituals are often absent or hollowed out, people struggle to navigate these transitions. Jung observed that without ritual, psychological crises become more destructive, because the individual faces them without guidance, without a symbolic framework to carry the meaning. Jung's reverence for religion was not naive. He did not argue that every dogma or institution was perfect. He knew that religion could become rigid, oppressive, or misused. But he insisted that its symbolic core must not be discarded. He saw in religion the accumulated wisdom of the collective unconscious, refined across centuries, offering images and stories that connect the human soul to the eternal. He was particularly drawn to Christianity, not in a doctrinal sense, but in its rich symbolism. The image of Christ, for Jung, represented the archetype of the self, the reconciliation of divine and human, of suffering and redemption, of opposites held in unity. The cross, the resurrection, the descent into hell, all these were archetypal dramas, reflecting the psyche's movement toward wholeness. But he also studied Eastern religions, finding in the mandalas of Hinduism and Buddhism powerful expressions of psychic totality, symbols that echoed the same wholeness he saw in his own visions. For Jung, to ignore myth was to cut oneself off from the soul. Modern people who laughed at ancient stories, he argued, often failed to realize that they were living their own myths unconsciously. They believed they had escaped superstition, but they were still moved by archetypal forces, only now without awareness. They became possessed by ideologies, by collective hysteria, by materialism, because they lacked the symbolic framework that myth provides. Religion and myth, Jung taught, are like bridges. They connect the conscious mind with the unconscious, offering images that allow us to engage the numinous without being destroyed by it. Without these bridges, we are left adrift, vulnerable to eruptions of unconscious energy that overwhelm us. With them, we find guidance, we find meaning, we find a way to participate in the great story of humanity. As you lie here, letting your breath slow, you might think of the ancient stories that still linger in your memory. Perhaps a tale you heard as a child, a myth from school, a parable, a ritual. These are not just old words. They are mirrors of your own inner journey, the gods and heroes, the trials and transformations they live in you. They always have. Jung's reverence for these stories was not about nostalgia. It was about recognition, He knew that the psyche speaks in images, and myth is the language it has always spoken. When you dream tonight, you will dream in myths of your own, private and unique, yet echoing the same patterns that shaped the stories of ages past. To honor them is to honor the wisdom of the unconscious, the ancient voice that whispers beneath the surface of life. Jung lived in a time of upheaval: world wars, technological revolutions, the decline of traditional religion in Europe. He saw clearly that the modern world, for all its progress, left many people adrift in loneliness. Old certainties had collapsed. Myths and rituals no longer held the same authority. The gods had retreated, but the hunger for meaning had not disappeared. In fact, Jung believed it had grown sharper. Modern humanity was free from many constraints, but also more vulnerable than ever to emptiness, despair, and alienation. Loneliness, Jung argued, is not only about the absence of people. One can be surrounded by others and still feel profoundly alone. True loneliness comes when the individual feels cut off from meaning, when life seems flat, mechanical, without connection to the deeper rhythms of the soul. The modern world, with its emphasis on material success and external achievement, often leaves the inner life neglected. People are busy but inwardly barren. They strive, but they do not know why. This spiritual loneliness, Jung observed, often manifests in symptoms: depression, anxiety, addiction, restlessness. Beneath these struggles lies the same root, the soul's hunger for meaning. When the unconscious is ignored, it does not disappear. It protests. It sends signals through dreams, through symptoms, through crises that force attention. Many of Jung's patients came to him not because of external misfortune, but because of this inner emptiness, the feeling that life had lost its center. Why do we still crave meaning today? Because meaning is not a luxury. It is as essential as food or shelter. Without it, we wither. We are creatures who seek purpose, who long to see our lives as part of a greater story. The unconscious knows this, and it will not rest until the conscious mind listens. Dreams remind us of forgotten truths. Synchronicities hint at hidden connections. Symbols stir us with awe. These are the ways the psyche resists reduction to machinery, insisting that life is more than chance. Jung believed that much of modern loneliness came from the loss of shared myths. In earlier ages, people lived within collective stories that gave life coherence: religions, traditions, cosmologies. With the decline of these structures, individuals were left to face the unconscious without guidance. Some turned to ideologies, others to distractions. But few had the tools to engage the psyche directly. Jung saw this as both crisis and opportunity. Crisis, because the absence of shared myth left many vulnerable to despair. Opportunity, because it opened the way for individuals to discover their own inner myth, their own direct relationship with the unconscious. He did not believe we could simply return to the old stories as if nothing had changed. The modern mind could not forget science, could not unlearn history, but he did believe we could rediscover the symbolic dimension of life, honoring the psyche's language of images, allowing meaning to arise from within. The task was not to deny modernity, but to balance it, to hold progress alongside depth, technology alongside spirituality, reason alongside imagination. Loneliness, Jung taught, is not always a curse. It can be the beginning of individuation. When the old certainties fail, when the noise of society fades, the individual has the chance to listen inwardly. In loneliness, the unconscious can speak more clearly. It invites us to turn from the external crowd to the inner depths, to discover meaning not imposed from outside, but arising from the self. And yet, The craving for meaning is also collective. People gather around symbols, stories, and rituals because they bind individuals into community. Jung warned that when healthy myths disappear, unhealthy substitutes often take their place. Ideologies can become false religions. Collective movements can seduce the lonely soul with promises of belonging. Without awareness, the hunger for meaning can be exploited, leading to fanaticism rather than wholeness. As you listen now, think of the loneliness that sometimes stirs in your own life. It may appear as restlessness, as emptiness, as a quiet longing. Jung would remind you that this is not something to fear. It is the call of the soul. It is the sign that you are more than the roles you play, more than the surface of daily life. You crave meaning because you are human, and the psyche itself demands it. Tonight, as sleep approaches, you are not alone. The collective unconscious binds you to humanity, past and present. The myths of old still whisper in your dreams. The symbols still rise to guide you. Your loneliness is real, but it is also a doorway to the deeper self, to the greater whole, to the mystery that connects all life. There is an image that appears again and again in the myths of many cultures: the traveler who must cross a dark sea at night. It is an image of fear, of surrender, of entering the unknown. The waves are black, the stars distant, the journey endless. And yet, in these stories, the night sea journey is never without purpose. It is always a passage, a trial that leads not only through despair, but also toward renewal. Jung took this myth seriously. He believed that the psyche itself undergoes such voyages, especially in times of crisis, when the light of certainty fades and the individual is left adrift in darkness. The night sea journey, for Jung, was a symbol of the descent into the unconscious. Life does not move only upward, toward progress and success. It moves in cycles, like the tide. There are moments of clarity and joy, but also times of collapse, of confusion, of despair. These dark times are not accidents. They are essential passages, necessary for transformation. To resist them is to remain stagnant. To endure them is to discover a deeper renewal than would otherwise be possible. In the ancient world, the night sea journey was often told through myths of gods and heroes. The sun god Ra sailed through the underworld each night, fighting monsters in the dark waters, before rising again at dawn. Odysseus wandered on endless seas, lost and tested, before returning home. Christ descended into hell before the resurrection. Again and again, the same story emerges. The soul must pass through death, like darkness, before new life can come. Jung saw in these myths the reflection of psychological truth. Every human being, at some point, must face despair. It may come as grief, as illness, as failure, as a crisis of meaning. Outwardly, life may continue, but inwardly the person feels cast adrift, swallowed by a sea without light. This is the night sea journey. It is terrifying, because the ego, accustomed to control and clarity, now feels powerless. The old maps no longer work. The guiding stars vanish. One feels abandoned, without direction. Yet Jung believed that it is in precisely these moments that the unconscious is most active. The night sea journey is not mere destruction. It is a descent that strips away illusions, forcing the soul to confront what it has ignored. The dreams of those in despair often become vivid, filled with archetypal images. These dreams may disturb, but they also carry guidance. The unconscious, though it may appear threatening, is seeking renewal. The old identity is dissolving, making space for a new form of life. The danger of the night sea journey lies in despair without meaning. When a person believes the darkness is endless, when they see no possibility of renewal, they may sink. Jung was aware of this danger, for he faced it himself in his confrontation with the unconscious. He spoke of times when he felt he was drowning in visions, close to madness. But he held fast to the belief that the journey had purpose. This trust that the unconscious seeks wholeness became his guiding star. It allowed him to endure the night and reach the dawn. He encouraged his patients to do the same. He did not minimize their suffering or offer easy optimism. Instead, he told them that despair is part of the journey, that to feel lost is natural, that the psyche moves in rhythms of death and rebirth. By honoring the darkness, by accepting the necessity of the night sea, the individual finds strength to endure. And in time, new light emerges. The dawn does not erase the journey, it transforms it. The one who returns from the sea is not the same as the one who set out. In your own life, you may recognize moments of the night sea journey, times when meaning collapsed, when you felt broken or adrift. These are not failures. They are initiations. They strip away what is false so that what is real may be born. They are painful, but they are also sacred. To pass through them consciously is to emerge with deeper wisdom, greater compassion, and a closer connection to the self. As you lie here now, imagine yourself on such a journey. The sea is dark, the boat small, the night endless. You feel the fear of uncertainty, the weight of despair. But you also know that you are moving, that the sea carries you somewhere. You do not yet see the shore, but it is there. Beyond the night, there is dawn. Beyond despair, there is renewal. Jung's lesson is that the psyche is oriented toward life, toward wholeness. Even in darkness, it seeks light. Even in despair, it prepares the ground for rebirth. So as you drift into sleep, do not fear the images that come, even if they are strange or heavy. They are part of your own night sea journey, guiding you through darkness toward renewal. Trust that the sea carries you, that the psyche knows the way, that beyond the night lies dawn. At the end of his long life, Jung reflected on what he had seen and learned. He had explored dreams, visions, myths, symbols. He had faced his own night sea journeys and guided many others through theirs. Again and again, he returned to one central truth. The human psyche seeks wholeness. Beneath all the conflicts, beneath the struggles of ego and shadow, anima and animus, persona and self, lies a movement toward integration, toward becoming fully human. This, he believed, is the deepest lesson of psychology, and perhaps the final lesson of life. Wholeness is not perfection. It is not the elimination of suffering or the achievement of constant happiness. For Jung, wholeness meant embracing the full reality of the psyche, the light and the dark, the joy and the pain, the conscious and the unconscious. To be whole is to accept contradiction, to live with paradox, to allow the opposites within us to coexist without denial. The task of individuation is not to become pure, but to become complete. Jung often used the image of the mandala to symbolize this wholeness. A circle divided into four, a pattern that brings balance and order, a symbol of the self. Again and again, his patients drew such images in their dreams and art, even without knowing their meaning. The psyche itself seeks to draw the circle, to reconcile the fragments, to reveal the hidden center. To return to wholeness is to return to this center, to live from the self, rather than only from the ego. As he grew older, Jung became more open about the spiritual dimension of this truth. He spoke of the self as the imago Dei, the image of God within, the spark of divinity that connects each person to the eternal. For him, the experience of wholeness was not merely psychological but numinous. It carried the feeling of the sacred. He did not prescribe dogma, nor did he demand belief. He simply described what he observed, that those who approached wholeness felt a sense of connection to something greater, something beyond the individual. But Jung also emphasized humility. Wholeness is never final. It is not a state to be reached once and for all, but a continual process, unfolding until death. Even then, he suggested, the psyche's journey may continue in ways we cannot imagine. He spoke of death not as an end, but as a transition, another passage into mystery. The psyche, he believed, belongs not only to time, but to eternity. What, then, is Jung's final lesson? Perhaps it is this: to live authentically, to listen to dreams, to honor the unconscious, to integrate the shadow, to balance the opposites, to accept the journey of despair and renewal, and to trust that through it all, the psyche moves toward wholeness. We do not control this movement. We participate in it. We can resist and suffer more deeply, or we can surrender and find meaning even in suffering. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, you are participating in this same process. The ego will rest. The unconscious will rise. Dreams will come, carrying messages, weaving symbols, guiding you gently toward integration. Each night, this rhythm repeats. Consciousness dissolves. The unconscious speaks, and you wake renewed, carrying fragments of wholeness into the day. Sleep itself is a mandala, a circle of descent and return. To surrender to it is to trust the psyche, to allow the deeper self to work in silence. You do not need to force anything. You do not need to solve every puzzle. You need only rest, and let the unconscious do its work. Jung would tell you that this, too, is individuation, the quiet, daily rhythm of surrender and renewal, guiding you slowly toward wholeness. So now, let yourself drift. The day is done. The sea has carried you to shore. The circle closes, not as an end, but as a promise of return. In sleep, the fragments of your soul draw closer together. You are guided. You are carried. You are moving toward wholeness. Trust this. Let the final lesson be not in words, but in silence, in rest, in the wholeness of simply being. And now, it's time to let go. Allow your breath to soften, your body to rest deeply, and your mind to drift wherever your dreams may take you. Sleep well, and know that every step of this journey has brought you closer to yourself. If you're still awake, you can continue by clicking one of the 2 videos on the screen, each guiding you further into calm reflection. And if you've enjoyed this experience, remember to subscribe so you can return here anytime you need rest, meaning, or gentle company. Sweet dreams, and good night.